And on this lecture, we'll go through some of the recommended readings. So, in Micro Foundations of Urban Agglomeration Economies, um, this starts with a better puzzle and a hook than I could have come up with if I had like a month to think about it for this class. So, it starts with noting that less than 2% of land, the land area in the United States was built up or paved by 1992. Despite so much of land being available for development, being basically just open space, almost all recent development is less than 1 kilometer away from earlier development. So this little puzzle they start with shows that people in cities tend to cluster together and that density is important for some reason, just highlighting that this is something that people seem to like, at basically getting us to ask the question in our own head, well, why is this the case? Really spurring our interest. I think it's a really well-written paper because of that. And like other readings, they build up of Marshall's theories of agglomeration economies. Now, I like the idea of micro foundations for these macro sorts of phenomena. So these phenomena are emergent from the decisions of collectives of individuals. So if you understand how individuals make decisions that lead to these outcomes, it's um, that is really important if you want to understand why these large macro phenomenon happen. It's the result um, of all those individuals, their choices, their reactions to incentives. Now, all the equations, all the models can be kind of tricky to read through. It was a bit of a slog. Since this is the DBA program, not the Econ PhD program, I don't think it's necessary to subject you to digging through all of them in detail. That's why this wasn't one of the required readings. But I think this paper is still worth reading, and at the very least, if you're not, retaining every single piece of minute information about the model, at least understand the broad strokes of what they're trying to say here. Um, I like the idea of starting with individuals, basically being what they consider in their models, and how this leads them to greater understanding of human decision making. Now, when I was an undergrad, my summer job was working in the shipping department at a dorm furniture factory. They shipped to colleges in the summer, so they needed college kids to come in, and I liked they paid better than a job folding clothes. When I noticed that while a lot of the plants were closed in the 2010s while I was there, there used to be a dozen plants all by my employer of just a huge stretch of furniture factories doing all different types of furniture. And it was near transportation. The land was, pretty flat. But even at the time, I wondered why they all located right there. It caused serious congestion issues that were like that they still had the roads set up specifically to try to deal with all the people ending work at the same time. So in geographic concentration in U.S. manufacturing industries, a dartboard approach, they seek to answer why firms of all different industry types tend to locate in this fashion. They have some interesting wrinkles in their model, like how they measure agglomeration to avoid counting industries with a small number of firms with a large number of employees each. And they also admit that their model suffers from data limitations, which really prevents them from looking at too granular of a level. Now, this may provide some ideas for future work with today's data, just because now we have much better data. We can answer questions today we couldn't in the past. But what they find is that there's more concentration at the state level. Hopefully, this sounds familiar. Um, I like tracing this work over time because if you read this article, you may not be convinced. But when you couple it with some of the other readings that followed, in the decade or so afterwards, the finding really seems legitimate. And it drives it home that we started with this more simple theory, simple model, and then slowly built upon it and tested it in more and more complex ways. And the last reading we had here was the cost of agglomeration, house and land prices in French cities. And this begins with a simple observation. Cities get expensive and crowded. And then from there, they set out to measure just how expensive and crowded the cities are. I think this is a great framing, but also a great way to look about how we choose research topics. I will note very briefly that Roback adds a really interesting wrinkle here. So looking at amenities, she distinguishes between a productive amenity, so things like roads that make an area more productive and enjoyable, with quality of life amenities, which simply means making life better, like parks or weather. And she finds that these have different effects on wages. I like splitting them up into these two things because there's some amenities that do improve productivity, while others that we also care about that are just for fun. And they may impact things differently. Think especially if you're trying to design regional policy, that's going to matter. Now, none of the four recommended readings are groundbreaking. It's more the main readings that are more groundbreaking. But the recommended readings, these are all good to show some wrinkles in the models, either some shortcomings or some additions that were added later. You can also start to see how a body of research grows. We start with a simple model, which is good, but it still leaves much to be desired. You then start to identify shortcomings in that model and incorporate ways to overcome those shortcomings. Later on, as data improves, we can start to test those models and see when they hold and which are the most accurate. My main area of research is occupational licensing, a state level labor market regulation. There, I have, at least in the past, taken the growth in the literature kind of as a given that it's just a natural one step to the next, something that was bound to happen. But looking at another topic, like here, these regional topics, really show me the excitement of tracking a field through its development and how much information that can really add and give you.